and then I'll proceed on with the introductions.
O Christ, the true light, who enlightens and sanctifies every man that cometh into the world, with the light of thy countenance be shined upon us, that in it we may see the unapproachable light, and guide our steps in the doing of the commandments through the intercessions of the most pure Mother and of all thy saints. Amen.
Thank you, Your Eminence. Thank you all for joining us again. It's such a joy to welcome you again to the 5th annual St. Photios Orthodox Theological Seminary Conference. It's a 3-day-long conference, and it feels like we're on day 4. Yesterday was so packed, and it was such a joy to have His Eminence Metropolitan Moses join us and serve for the hierarchical liturgy yesterday for the feast day of the seminary. And we had a wonderful luncheon prepared by the nuns, and a wonderful, wonderful lecture by Father Forzi. If you missed it by any chance, that is available on the YouTube channel of the seminary, and a recording will also be distributed to all of you that are joining us on Zoom. I do want to take a minute or two just to quickly go over the schedule today. We have a very packed schedule. All of you that are here present should have received your conference packet that has all the information, including the schedule, and we're going to go over the schedule shortly, but I do want to just remind everybody that there are release forms. These are important for you to fill out, especially if you plan on going sledding this afternoon. So I need these before lunch. So if you're going sledding, these need to be signed and submitted to Gabrielle before lunch, and that way we can get an accurate head count of who's going, make sure that all the rides and transportations, and we have enough sleds. So please make sure to fill out your release form. So today we have our first lecture, St. Chrysostomos, the New Confessor and Restoration of Church Traditions. Immediately following this, for those here at the conference in person, we will be proceeding to the convent of St. Elizabeth for a tour. So that is going to be at 11 o'clock. We have to maintain the schedule. Yesterday we had a lot of questions, but we also had a little bit more flexibility in the time. Today, because this evening we do have an evening in question-answer session at 7:30 for the conference attendees, in-person conference attendees. I'm going to try to give the opportunity for our virtual guests to ask their questions, and then you'll have an opportunity to follow up for tonight's panel at 7:30. For the virtual audience, at 11 o'clock, for all of you that are joining us via Zoom, we have a question and answer session immediately following this lecture. There will be a panel of some seminary personnel, faculty, and students, and that will be your opportunity to ask questions while our guests are getting a tour of the convent. Then we break for lunch at 12:30, and we have our second lecture at 2 o'clock, The Appearance of the Cross in Our Lives by Archimandrite Gregory. Following that is the sledding. For those that are interested in learning how to make prayer ropes, we have a prayer rope workshop that is organized by the nuns, as well as having the opportunity to visit the Eastern Christian Supply store right here in town. So that's sort of an overview of the schedule. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to either approach myself or one of the other administrators, and we'll try to get you an answer. So that being said, I again want to extend a warm welcome to everybody. Today for the Q&A immediately following the lecture, if you are on Zoom, please submit your questions to Gabrielle, who once again is serving as our virtual conference hostess, and she will make sure to forward those to me. Today's lecture is presented by Father Jiří, who is a married priest serving at the Saints Cyprian and Justina Orthodox Church here in Etna, California, where he lives with his family, Presbytera Clara, and their wonderful children. A native of the Czech Republic, Father Jiří received his doctoral degree in theology at the Charles University in Prague, studied as a postgraduate student in the Faculty of Theology at the University of Athens, and was a visiting scholar at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. Father Jiří is now a professor at the St. Photios Orthodox Theological Seminary. In addition to teaching classes, dogmatics, ecclesiology and ecumenism, as well as patristics, he also serves in many crucial roles for the continual administrative and development of the seminary, serving as a co-director of the curriculum development. He serves on the curriculum committee, as well as the director of the faculty continuing education. And glory be to God, as of this fall, he was the first of our faculty to serve the greater church in the clergy continuing education initiative. I believe we have up to 18, over a dozen clergymen from all around the country that are able to gather every other week through Zoom and are attending lectures with Father Jiří. So we're very, very grateful for all of his efforts on behalf of the seminary and the church. His lecture today is entitled St. Chrysostomos, the New Confessor, and the Restoration of Church Traditions. This is a crucial, pivotal figure in the history of Orthodoxy in the 20th century, and I believe that his writings, his examples, and his truly inspired ecclesiological understanding will continue to only be appreciated more and more during the course of the 21st century. So without any further ado, please please join me in welcoming Father Jiří. Thank you.
Your Eminencies, Metropolitan Moses, Bishop Auxentius, Reverend Fathers, Reverend Mothers, dear brothers and sisters in Christ, Eulogite. 100 years ago, in 1924, a profound challenge to Orthodox unity arose with the unilateral and uncanonical introduction of the Gregorian calendar by some Orthodox churches, including the Church of Greece. This decision marked a turning point in the history of Orthodoxy, creating a division between those who upheld the Orthodox faith and its sacred traditions and those who embraced innovation and modernist reforms. The tragic 100th anniversary of the calendar reform is followed this year by another, but this time joyful anniversary: the apparition of the precious cross over the church of St. John the Theologian in suburban Athens, which occurred on the eve of the Feast of the Universal Exaltation of the Holy Cross in 1925. This miraculous event, which was taken by the faithful as a divine confirmation of the righteousness of the sacred struggle for the ecclesiastical calendar, provided great consolation and encouragement to those facing persecution for their fidelity to the traditions of the fathers. As we mark the centennial of the calendar reform, we do so with deep gratitude towards the confessors of the faith who stood firm in the face of pressure and persecution. Among them, the most prominent place is rightly given to the spiritual father of our all-kind church, that true pillar of orthodoxy, Saint Chrysostomos, the new confessor, the former metropolitan of Florina. In the consciousness of our church, Saint Chrysostomos has always been seen as nothing less than a modern counterpart of the hierarch confessors and the fathers of the church, who in times past shone forth as divinely chosen defenders of the Orthodox faith. This fact was officially confirmed by the long-awaited Agiokatataxis, which is the proclamation of the placement of saint's name in the church festal calendar, which took place on Saturday, May 15, 2016, on the eve of the Sunday of Samaritan women at the historic convent of the Dormition of the Theotokos in Parnitha, where our saint was buried and where his relics are kept for veneration by the faithful. In the synodical act of Agiokatataxis, he is referred to as the zealot according to knowledge of the traditional faith, the one who opposed every contrivance against the Orthodox faith, and an excellent shepherd of the reason-endowed flock of Christ in difficult times of apostasy from the right faith. If we want to understand better the place of Saint Chrysostomos that Saint Chrysostomos holds in our church, we must say a few words about the primacy. There have been two different concepts of primacy in the history of Christianity: the primacy of the truth and the primacy of jurisdiction and power. The first was developed by the Holy Fathers during the first centuries of the Church and thus became an indispensable part of Holy Tradition. The second was introduced into the life of the Western Church after the Great Schism in the 11th century. What do we mean by the primacy of the truth? Let us suppose that a divisive issue arises in the life of the Church, causing great upheaval and turmoil, ultimately leading to schism. Christians are divided in two or more camps, each side claiming to express the Orthodox faith regarding the disputed issue. In such critical situation, one member of the church, who might or might not be a bishop, receives what the fathers call the charisma of truth, enabling him to express the Orthodox faith regarding the contested subject more genuinely, clearly, and authoritatively than others. Two important points must be stressed. The first, the spiritual charisma is given by the Lord of the Church as a result of the prayers and repentance of the faithful who entreat God to enlighten the true shepherd of the Church. And second, that this charisma is not granted without conditions. It has always been given to those who, in the words of Saint Gregory the Theologian, were advanced in theoria, meaning those who had progressed in the hesychastic life of purification, illumination, and deification, and who had acquired their experience in the Holy Spirit. This charismatic individual becomes the bearer of the primacy of truth, which instills within him an heightened sense of responsibility for the whole Church, compelling him to speak with greater urgency. During the first decades, when the calendar innovation and the nascent heresy of ecumenism invaded orthodoxy and divided Church, it seems that it was Saint Chrysostom who was given this particular charisma. Through his deeds and words, he demonstrated what it means to remain faithful to orthodoxy and to follow the mind of the Church in an age of apostasy and ecumenism. Saint Chrysostomos was a many-sided personality who can be approached from different angles. In today's lecture, we will examine him as the one who, through his writings, outlined and developed the theological, ecclesiological, and canonical foundation upon which our old calendar church built its historical quest for the restoration of orthodoxy, standing against the heresy of ecumenism and the condemnable calendar innovation. As we will see, one of the main reasons that led St. Chrysostomos to reject the calendar innovation was his clear and full awareness that the Gregorian calendar was imposed on the Church of Greece as the first step in a broader program aimed at leading the Orthodox Church into union with Western churches. Therefore, it will be helpful for us to examine St. Chrysostomos' perspective on Western Christianity. St. Chrysostomos was convinced that as a result of the historical process of mutual alienation between the Eastern and Western churches during the first millennium, the originally united Church of Christ became divided in two: the Eastern Orthodox Church, which remained faithful to the dogmatic faith and traditions of the 7 ecumenical synods, and the heretical Church of the West, which violated the sacred legacy of the holy apostles and God-bearing fathers, and changed the symbol of faith and introduced new dogmas. Looking at the history of the Western Church, St. Chrysostomos concluded that the Latin Church, quote, failed to penetrate the rigid soul of the West and to transfuse into its bosom the essence of its divine nature, end quote. In his view, the East and the West approach Christianity from different perspectives. The East cherished the Church's charismatic, divine, and spiritual dimension, whereas the West was more drawn to its administrative and human aspects. According to St. Chrysostomos, Christianity can be understood as the meeting point between divine and human spheres. This meeting can be achieved in two ways: either by elevating man to the divine world, making him resemble God, or by lowering the divine to human expectations and earthly needs. St. Chrysostomos was persuaded that the first approach was upheld by the Holy Fathers in the Orthodox East, while the second approach came to define Western Christianity. For these reasons, the Church of the West has always sought to adapt its religious regulations and ecclesiastical rites to evolving social perceptions and the latest scientific discoveries. In contrast, St. Chrysostomos says, the Eastern Orthodox Church strives to preserve its ecclesiastical traditions unchanged, in which the purely orthodox and divine spirit of the Christian faith has been crystallized. This is also why the Church of the West is often considered progressive, whereas the Church of the East is regarded as conservative and backward, St. Chrysostomos writes. These labels are valid only when Christianity is viewed from a purely secular and sociological perspective. However, when we shift our focus to the divine nature and sanctifying mission of the Christianity, which, as St. Chrysostomos emphasized, doesn't allow for development, having the stamp of divine perfection, we must reject the unjust accusation of stagnation against the Eastern Orthodox Church and instead attribute to it the embodiment of divine apostolicity. From the purely theological perspective, the concept of progressivism must be redefined, says St. Chrysostomos. Those who introduce innovations under the pretext of serving society, but in doing so move away from truth and orthodoxy, cannot be considered progressive. Rather, true progressives are those who hold firmly to truth and align their thoughts and actions with the orthodox spirit of the apostolic and synodal decrees. In this sense, the Orthodox should be considered progressive precisely because they remain faithful to the ancient apostolic and synodical decrees and the sacred ecclesiastical traditions. It is the Orthodox, St. Chrysostomos writes, who remain closest to the divine truth of the Christian faith, while Western Christians, in their pursuit of progress, have gradually distanced themselves from the divine spirit of Christianity, introducing more and more human dogmas and traditions. According to St. Chrysostomos, the future of Christianity in this world will depend on which approach ultimately prevails: the Orthodox, traditionalist spirit of the Eastern Church, or the heretical, modernist, and progressive spirit of the Western Church, St. Chrysostomos writes. The entire ecclesiastical activity of our saint after the First World War was shaped by the clash between two opposing visions regarding the future of the Church of Greece. On one side stood the camp of modernist reformers who sought to transform the Orthodox Church profoundly, bringing it closer to Western Christianity with the ultimate goal of achieving the union of divided Christendom. The first generation of Greek Orthodox ecumenists was inspired and guided by two Greek hierarchs. The first was Meletios Metaxakis, without any doubt the most tragic figure in the Orthodox Church of the last century. He served as the head of Church of Greece, then served as a patriarch of Constantinople, and finally he occupied the See of Alexandria. The second was Chrysostomos Papadopoulos, a theologian, professor of church history, and from 1923 to 38, the primate of the Church of Greece and Metropolitan of Athens. Opposing them was the camp of old calendarists and Orthodox traditionalists, who found their spiritual leader in the person of St. Chrysostomos. Let me present a somewhat lengthy but highly enlightening passage that summarizes his thoughts on the subject of ecclesiastical traditions. Quote, "The divinely inspired apostles and the spirit-bearing fathers of the Church forbade, under penalty of excommunication and anathema, any alteration or modification of the dogmatic and liturgical traditions of the Church, since these traditions were inspired by the Holy Spirit. They are divine and perfect, and therefore not subject to any change or modification by human reasoning. This is because any alteration or modification by human intellect in what has been established and legislated by divine inspiration through the holy and God-bearing fathers of the seven ecumenical synod inevitably diminishes the divine authority of our religion. For human reasoning can never conceive of anything more perfect than what has been ordained and legislated by the inspiration of the All-Holy Spirit." End quote. According to our saint, a hierarch who has been deeply formed in the ecclesiastical spirit and has acquired a genuine Orthodox mindset never contemplates reforms or modifications to ecclesiastical norms, canons, and institutions, which constitute the touchstone of orthodoxy. With this creed in mind, he fiercely opposed the destructive actions of the aforementioned church reformers. At a time when only a few people recognize the grave danger posed by emerging ecumenism to orthodoxy, he wrote with breathtaking clarity and prophetic voice the following statement, quote, "These two ambitious clergymen, failing to appreciate properly the power of the deep Orthodox spirit and the great and divine mission of orthodoxy within the Church of Christ, in their naive conscience and superficial judgment believed that they were offering a service to the Christian world by bringing the Orthodox Church closer to the Church of the West by any means, even at a cost of sacrificing the pure treasure of orthodoxy." End quote. In his polemical treatises, he exposes what he calls the unification program, which these two high-ranking clergymen launched through calendar reform. In his writings, he refers to them as radical innovators, reformers, and destroyers of ecclesiastical traditions, whose deepest desire and goal was to unite the Orthodox Church with the churches of the West. He rebukes them as, quote, as lacking a deep Orthodox spirit, knowingly or unknowingly becoming instruments of foreign desires and aims through which the division of the Orthodox Church was sought. End quote. The significance of these quotations cannot be overstated, as they prove beyond any doubt that in the conscience of the spiritual leader of the All-Calendar Church, the question of the calendar reform was inseparably linked to the broader context of ecumenism. Given this, the common accusation against old calendarists that they were merely obsessed with dates and astronomical accuracy and only later added the subject of ecumenism to justify their schism is completely untenable in light of historical evidence. In his polemical text, St. Chrysostomos captivates his readers with his complex, thorough, and meticulous treatment of all aspects of the calendar question, including the role of the ecclesiastical calendar as a bulwark protecting orthodoxy from Western heresies. He explains that the Paschalion and the church calendar serve two essential functions in the life of the Orthodox Church. First, they guide the liturgical life and divine worship of the Church. Second, they serve to separate the Orthodox Church visibly and tangibly from heresies. For precisely this reason, the fathers of the First Ecumenical Synod ordered the Paschalion in such a way that the Orthodox would never celebrate Pascha before or alongside the Jews. The church calendar also took on an anti-heretical dimension after Pope Gregory XIII introduced the new calendar into the Roman Catholic Church in 1582 and urged the Eastern Patriarchs to follow suit. In response, Patriarch Jeremiah II convened 3 pan-Orthodox synods where the Gregorian calendar was repudiated and condemned as, quote, a novelty of old Rome, a global scandal, and an arbitrary violation of the ecclesiastical and synodal canons and traditions, end quote. St. Chrysostomos reprimands the new calendar years, arguing that they failed to realize that the ecclesiastical calendar, quote, apart from being interwoven with the Paschalion and divine worship, has also served and continues to serve as an unshakable stronghold in the struggle of orthodoxy against Western heresies and false doctrines, safeguarding the pure and unchanged spirit of the Christian faith, end quote. To grasp St. Chrysostomos' perspective on the relationship between Orthodoxy and Western Christianity fully, it is essential to note that he wasn't opposed to the idea of reuniting divided Christianity. However, he had a radically different understanding of the nature of such a union and the procedure the Orthodox should follow to achieve this goal. Quote, and we, without any hesitation, desire and do not reject, nor do we in any way deny the rapprochement or even the union of the churches, something which our Orthodox Church prays for daily. However, this desire and prayer must never be pursued at the cost of sacrificing and abandoning orthodoxy, which would submit to false doctrine. Rather, it must be achieved through the sacrifice of falsehood, which must submit to orthodoxy. End quote. If we were to summarize the main reasons why St. Chrysostomos considered the new calendar to be rejected by all Orthodox Christians, we could present the following list. The calendar reform was unilateral and uncanonical, lacking the consent of all Orthodox churches. It was implemented contrary to the traditions of the 7 ecumenical synods and the age-old practice of the Orthodox Church. It caused a rupture in the unity of the Orthodox Church, dividing Christians into new calendarists and old calendarists. It violated church canons which govern divine worship and the annual liturgical cycle of feasts and fasts. It is indirectly related to the dogma of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church as confessed in the 9th article of the Symbol of Faith. The calendar reform was prepared and introduced as a part of a broader project to align Orthodoxy with Western Christianity. Finally, the calendar reform provoked scandal and division among Christians, weakening in this way mutual love and solidarity among Christians. St. Chrysostomos divides these arguments in 2 main accusations. He proves beyond any doubt that the calendar reform, that the calendar innovation was directly related to church traditions and liturgical life and indirectly related to dogma of the unity of the Church. Regarding the first accusation, St. Chrysostomos explains that the first ecumenical synod, the Church established the Paschalion based on the Julian calendar and its spring equinox. This served as the foundation upon which the Church built its annual liturgical cycle of feasts and fasts. This system was subsequently confirmed by all later ecumenical synods and reinforced by the centuries-old practice of the Orthodox Church. As a result, we no longer refer simply to the Julian calendar, but to the ecclesiastical calendar. In his defense of the Julian/ecclesiastical calendar as an organic part of ecclesiastical tradition, Saint Chrysostomos frequently refers to the proclamation of the Fathers of the Seventh Ecumenical Synod at the conclusion of its 8th session. Quote, "If anyone rejects any ecclesiastical tradition, written or unwritten, let him be anathema." End quote. However, an even more important consideration is the fact that the uncanonical and unilateral introduction of the new calendar also affected the dogma of the unity of the Church. The introduction of the Gregorian calendar, deceptively presented as a mere correction of the Julian calendar, contradicts the dogma of the unity of the one Church. St. Chrysostomos explains that the unity of the Church has two inseparable aspects, one being the confession of the same Orthodox faith, and the other being shared worship, liturgical life, and common ecclesiastical practices. Throughout his treatises, he emphasizes that church dogma and divine worship are not merely theoretical knowledge, but a lived experience, a simultaneous uniform expression of faith. Therefore, when one and the same divine worship becomes fragmented into different times and forms, one can no longer logically claim that the dogma and divine worship retain their unity. He raises a crucial question, quote, "How can Christians who share one faith, one divine worship, one baptism, one Lord, and the same mysteries, belong to the same church when some of them celebrate the baptism of Christ in the Jordan on the Feast of Theophany, while others have not yet even celebrated the Nativity of Christ and are still in a period of fasting and repentance?" End quote. One of Saint Chrysostomos' most significant achievements was his theological, ecclesiological, and canonical analysis of the new ecclesiastical situation created by the calendar innovation. He used his charisma of deep ecclesiastical thinking and vast knowledge of patristic theology, church history, and canon law to explain the ecclesiological status of both new calendar innovators and those who opposed them. To accomplish this remarkable task, he had to engage in debate on two fronts simultaneously. On one side, he had to defend the legitimacy of the Church resistance against new calendar innovators, who condemned him as a schismatic and deposed him from his episcopal rank. On the other side, he had to confront certain old calendarists who, in their effort to follow the apostolic exhortation, stand fast and hold the tradition, lacked zeal according to knowledge, and accused him of being a compromiser and a betrayer of the sacred struggle. This dual challenge forced him to approach the subject of ecclesiology in a more complex manner, allowing him to anchor the old calendar church on the firm and secure canonical foundation of the Church Fathers' centuries-long anti-heretical struggle in the spirit of both truth and love. We will divide our presentation of St. Chrysostomos' ecclesiological thesis in two parts. The first part will cover the initial 2 years during which the Old Calendar Synod remained unified in its struggle for the restoration of orthodoxy. The second part will trace the development of his theological thought in response to the tragic schism that occurred within the Old Calendar Church. So let us start with the first part, which covers the year 1935 to 1937. Saint Chrysostomos, following in the footsteps of Saint Maximus the Confessor and Saint Gregory Palamas, established a causal relationship between the essence of the Church and the confession of the true faith. Saint Maximus proclaimed that the Catholic Church consists in the true and salvific confession of the faith. In a similar spirit, Saint Gregory Palamas wrote that those who do not belong to the truth do not belong to the Church of Christ either, because, as he says, the Church does not consist of people, but in the truth and the exactness of the Orthodox faith. Placed by divine providence in a similar position to these two confessors, as one called to defend orthodoxy and stand against the majority of the church hierarchy of his time, who had failed in their episcopal duty to keep the faith and traditions of the church unchanged, Saint Chrysostomos wrote, quote, "The essence of the Greek Orthodox Church is not determined by the number of hierarchs, but by the dogmas and traditions that we have received from the 7 ecumenical synods, which constitute the infallible criterion of orthodoxy." End quote. According to Saint Chrysostomos, to distort the divinely inspired dogmatic and canonical decisions of the ecumenical synods, which comprise the very essence of orthodoxy, means to threaten the sacred and divine nature of the Church and undermine its unbreakable authority. When such actions are taken by higher ecclesiastical authorities, Saint Chrysostomos stresses that we must remember that the polity of the Eastern Orthodox Church is constitutional. It is neither monarchical, as in the Roman Catholic Church, where the supreme sacerdotal and administrative power lies in the hands of the Pope, nor democratic, as in Protestantism, where every believer may be guided by his own faith. In the Orthodox Church, the constitution of the Orthodox Church is determined by and consists of dogmas, apostolic tradition, and synodal ordinances. Therefore, any synodal decision that infringes upon the canons and traditions of the Church must not be accepted by the faithful, who are the vigilant guardians of the Church's constitution. In the Orthodox Church, St. Chrysostomos writes, both those who shepherd and those who are shepherded are under the binding authority of the Church's constitution. What makes a decision by a hierarch or synod of hierarchs canonical, according to St. Chrysostomos, is not the fact that it was issued by official hierarchy, but whether it is in agreement with the dogmas and canons of the Church. These thoughts are of immense importance today, due to the widespread misinterpretation of the terms canonicity and canonical since the beginning of the last century. As a result, canonical, which originally meant according to church canons, has come to be wrongly understood as a synonym for official. In this distorted context, higher ecclesiastical authority is viewed as the sole source of canonicity, and whatever it decides, even if it blatantly contradicts the church canon, is regarded as canonical simply because it was promulgated by the hierarchy. According to St. Chrysostomos, hierarchs themselves are subject to the constitution of the Church, and their decisions are valid and binding only insofar as they comply with church canons. Conversely, if hierarchs move the eternal boundaries set by the Holy Fathers, they lose any they lose any right to be respected and obeyed by their flock. The argument that it was the majority of hierarchs which accepted the calendar reform has no validity with respect to the essence of orthodoxy, which is safeguarded only where the constitution of the Church is kept intact. He reminds his reader that there have been times in the history of the Church when the majority of the hierarchy along with the state embraced heresy, while only a few hierarchs remained faithful to orthodoxy. Yet, the Church never condemned these few faithful hierarchs as rebels or schismatics. Instead, it was the many who followed heresy that were condemned, for they had deviated from the true faith. Explaining the canonicity of ceasing ecclesiastical communion with the hierarchical innovators, he refers to the 15th canon of the Second Synod, which grants the right to separate oneself from a hierarch who publicly teaches in the Church contrary to what divine fathers have established in ecumenical and local synods, even before a synodal verdict is issued against him. He points out that according to this canon, such individuals shall indeed be deemed worthy of the honor befitting those of right faith, since they have not sundered the union of the Church with any schism, but have been diligent to rescue the Church from schisms and divisions. St. Chrysostomos vehemently rejected all accusation that their separation from the innovators was an act of revolt or schism. On many occasions he made it clear that they didn't raise the flag of rebellion, but rather the glorious and honored banner of the unification of divided orthodoxy and the reconciliation of the Church on the only acceptable basis, that of the sacred traditions of the ecumenical synods. In accordance with what St. Chrysostomos calls a full and accurate understanding of the concept of the dogma of the one Church, the Church of Greece, in the aftermath of the unilateral and uncanonical introduction of the new calendar, was divided. Old calendarists and new calendarists, despite holding the same dogmas and having the same divine worship, cannot truly, he writes, belong to the same Church when they are not united in the celebration of the Church feasts. The day after, St. Chrysostomos, together with Metropolitan Germanos of Demetrias and Metropolitan Chrysostomos Zakynthos, assumed episcopal responsibility for the all calendar flock, they sent a proclamation to the new calendar synod, in which they stated that its hierarchy, because of the calendar reform, had separated and walled itself off from the universal body of orthodoxy, and thus declared itself schismatic in relation to the Orthodox churches that continued to stand firm on the foundation of the 7 ecumenical synod and Orthodox traditions. It is especially important regarding the future division within the All Calendar Church to consider other statements by St. Chrysostomos in which he elucidates the nature of the new calendar schism. In his masterpiece, written during his first exile, with the title The Ecclesiastical Calendar as the Criterion of Orthodoxy, he clarifies the aforementioned proclamation about schism by stating, "We have declared them to be schismatic as individuals and not as representatives of the reality of the Church." In another text, he adds that although in essence the schism already exists, it has not yet been officially declared by Pan-Orthodox Synod. A little further on, he exhorts the chief architects of the schism to remedy this evil and to heal this festering wound before it turns into gangrene, necessitating the amputation of a part of the ecclesiastical body. These clarifications are of immense importance in understanding the ecclesiological stance of our saint regarding the schismatic New Calendar Church as they were written during the period of the unified Old Calendar Synod. As we can see, St. Chrysostomos makes a distinction between hierarchs as individuals and the churches they represent and administer. Individual hierarchs may sin and fall in confessing the Orthodox faith and following Orthodox traditions. In doing so, they separate themselves from the body of the Church and become schismatic. And, because of that, they become worthy of renunciation and rejection by Orthodox believers who do not want to become equally responsible for their sins and transgressions and therefore wall themselves off from these hierarchs. However, the same cannot be said about the Church itself as a whole. For a local church to become schismatic and to fall away from the body of the Church, an ecclesiastical trial must be conducted as foreseen by church canons. With his deep knowledge of canonical law, St. Chrysostomos considered the New Calendar Church to be schismatic in the sense of being accused of schism and awaiting its trial before a pan-Orthodox synod, which is the only institution capable of resolving the calendar issue. The idea that the Church of Greece could have fallen away from the reality of the Church automatically without a proper judicial proceeding before a pan-Orthodox synod was for him wholly untenable and unacceptable, as it was in full contradiction with the teachings of the ecumenical synods and the entire canonical tradition. As we see in the ecclesiological thought of St. Chrysostomos, the institution of the pan-Orthodox or ecumenical synod played an irreplaceable role in resolving the schism of the Church caused by the calendar innovation. This is why, immediately after his separation from the state church, he contacted other patriarchates that had not introduced the new calendar, that had not introduced the new calendar, in an effort to persuade them of the inevitability and necessity of convening a pan-Orthodox synod to restore the unity of the Orthodox Church. Here, we must remember that St. Chrysostomos traveled throughout the Middle East from December 1935 to May 1936 to have discussions with the patriarchates, with the patriarchs of Jerusalem, of Antioch, and of Alexandria. Couple of months later, he sent a report to the Synod of the Church of Greece regarding these discussions, informing the new calendar hierarchy of the assurances he had received regarding the convocation of an ecumenical synod and making an appeal that they also contribute to the convocation of a pan-Orthodox synod which would unite the divided church. So far, we learned that St. Chrysostomos, in this first period, regarded the Church of Greece as divided by the calendar innovation into two churches. One was schismatic, but had not yet been officially declared as such by a pan-Orthodox synod. This church was seriously contaminated by a disease that might still be cured by a return to the church calendar, before it turned into deadly gangrene, which would ultimately be cut off from Christ's body by the decision of an ecumenical synod. But how did he view the Old Calendar Church? From different proclamations of the time, it is obvious that he saw the Old Calendar Church as the historical continuation of the autocephalous Orthodox Church of Greece, precisely because it preserved its faith and traditions intact and without alteration. The Holy Synod formed when the three metropolitans joined the all-calendar movement and consecrated 4 new bishops, declared itself to be, quote, the synod of the Greek Church that follows the ancestral traditions, end quote. Now, let us move to second part of our presentation of ecclesiastical thinking of St. Chrysostomos, which covers the years following Matthewite schism. Before we proceed to examine how the ecclesiological position of St. Chrysostomos further developed in the context of division caused by Bishop Matthew, let us briefly outline the sequence of events that led to this tragic division. In June 1937, St. Chrysostomos provided a more detailed explanation regarding the question of who has the canonical right to declare the new calendar Church of Greece definitively and conclusively to be schismatic. In a letter written to monk Mark Chaniotis, St. Chrysostomos articulated what he believed to be the most fundamental principle of Eastern canon law, that such an authority belongs only to a pan-Orthodox synod and not to those who had canonically ceased communion with the new calendarists to avoid equal responsibility for the violations of church canons. Since this hadn't yet happened, the innovators had not been condemned, and therefore it was not necessary to rechristmate children who had been chrismated in the new calendar church after the calendar innovation was introduced. This clarification scandalized This clarification scandalized the letter's recipient and certain other monks who found a receptive ear in Bishop Matthew of Resteni. In July 1937, Bishop Matthew formally requested that the Holy Synod issue an encyclical in which it would declare that all the mysteries of the innovating schismatic church were deprived of divine grace, and that the children baptized in the schism must be rechristmated upon their entry into the genuine Church of Christ. However, this request was rejected by the remaining members of the Holy Synod. In response, Bishop Matthew, in September 1937, issued a declaration announcing his breaking of spiritual communion with the Holy Synod until it returned to what he considered to be the original confession of faith without leniency, concessions, or compromises. In doing so, Bishop Matthew was referring to pastoral encyclical to the Orthodox Greek people that was issued by the Synod, that was issued in June 1935, in which 3 metropolitans, Germanos, St. Chrysostomos, and Chrysostomos Zakynthos, reiterated their earlier statement about the schism created by the new calendar hierarchy, but this time they added an urgent appeal to their flock, quote, to have no spiritual communion with the schismatic church and its clergy, whom the grace of the Holy Spirit has abandoned, end quote. A few weeks later, Bishop Matthew followed up with a denunciation of Metropolitan Germanos and St. Chrysostomos, accusing them of supposedly joining the ranks of apostates from Orthodoxy and blaspheming against the Holy Spirit due to their belief that the mysteries of new calendar hierarchs and clergy still retained divine grace. It is clear that St. Chrysostomos and Bishop Matthew had a radically different understanding of both the ecclesiastical status and consequences of new calendar schism, as well as of some prior synodal proclamations. There are 3 primary texts in which we can study how St. Chrysostomos, when challenged by Bishop Matthew's radical ecclesiology, articulated his understanding of the identity and the mission of the All-Calendar Church in its sacred struggle for the restoration of Orthodox faith and tradition within the Church of Greece. The first text is the letter that St. Chrysostomos sent in October 1937 to Bishop Germanos of Kyklades, who, despite initially rejecting Bishop Matthew's position, later changed his stance and joined his schism. The second text is a pastoral encyclical that St. Chrysostomos circulated in June 1944, following the repose of Metropolitan Germanos of Demetrias. At this time, he was the sole remaining hierarch of the canonical synod of the All-Calendar Church, and in this document, he systematically rebutted the principal tenets of Bishop Matthew's ecclesiology. Since his pastoral encyclical provoked negative reactions not only from the Matthewites, but also from some of his own close collaborators, St. Chrysostomos found it necessary to follow up with another document entitled A Clarification of Pastoral Encyclical. Based primarily on these three texts, we will now present the basic ecclesiological tenets of St. Chrysostomos from the period following the Matthewite schism. So the first principle, the distinction between what might be called the distinction between the charismatic and administrative dimension of the Church. Orthodox ecclesiology distinguishes between two dimensions of the Church, following the paradigm of the Chalcedonian dogma, which states that in Christ there are two natures, divine and human, united without confusion and separation. In a similar manner, the Church consists of two parts or sides: the divine, spiritual, and invisible on one side, and the earthly, human, and visible on the other. Nevertheless, the Church remains one and united, existing as the body of the God-man Christ. Based on this, St. Chrysostomos asserts that the Church, regarding its divine side, or the Church, as a divine and self-subsistent organism, is fundamentally different from and independent of the hierarchs who represent and administer her. This means that any incorrect ideas or opinions held by hierarchs, as long as they have not been judged or condemned by a canonical and valid synod as heretical and false, do not affect the divine side of the Church to which these hierarchs belong. For example, when one or more hierarchs introduce uncanonical innovation into the Church, this sin falls upon the innovating hierarchs as individuals, making them culpable before God and the entire Church. However, it does not affect or diminish the orthodoxy of the Church they administer. The orthodox character of the local Church, its divine nature, is only affected when the hierarchs who shepherd it are judged and condemned by an ecumenical synod, which has the authority to withhold grace from the Church and the divine validity of its mysteries. If this distinction is not acknowledged, it leads to significant difficulties and confusion. This can be, for example, illustrated by the case of anti-ecumenists within official orthodoxy of today. Although they recognize that their hierarchs preach heresy of ecumenism within the Church, they nevertheless argue that they cannot break communion with them, because doing so would mean separating themselves from the Church as well. This leads to the apparently paradoxical conclusion, at least from an Orthodox standpoint, that one must remain in communion with a heresy-preaching hierarch in order to remain within the Church. In the case of Bishop Matthews and those who followed him, the inability to understand this distinction between charismatic and administrative dimension of the Church is at the core of their teaching regarding the instantaneous and automatic falling away of the new calendar Church from the grace of God upon the introduction of the calendar reform by its hierarchs. According to their logic, the fall of the hierarchy inevitably brings about the fall of the entire Church, including those churches in Eucharistic communion with them. The second principle, the distinction between potential and actual schism and schismatics. In presenting his ecclesiological thinking and rebutting Matthewite theology, St. Chrysostomos refers to a basic concept of church canon law, the distinction between potential and actual, or uncondemned and condemned, schismatics or heretics. He applied this distinction to explain the meaning of the proclamation of the new calendar Church as schismatics in 1935. We use the word schism, he writes, in the sense that on account of the calendar innovation, the hierarchy has cut itself off from the other Orthodox churches with regard to the celebration of the feasts and the observance of the fasts. In this way, they became schismatics and lost divine grace, but only potential and not in actuality. End quote. Since they changed the calendar, they, new calendarists, abide under the curses and anathemas pronounced by the ecumenical synods against those who violate ecclesiastical traditions. However, they will become actual schismatics and be deprived of divine grace only when they are proclaimed as such by the entire Church gathered in a pan-Orthodox synod. The reason for this is that only the whole Church throughout a synod, through a synod, has the exclusive and divine right to withhold grace from them and to excise them from the body of Christ. St. Chrysostomos refers to St. Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain and his commentaries in the Rudder, where St. Nicodemus explains that the Church canons require a synod of living hierarchs to depose clergymen or to excommunicate or anathemize laymen who transgress the canons. However, if the synod does not actually carry out the deposition or excommunication, those clergymen and laymen are neither actually deposed nor actually excommunicated or anathematized. In this context, it is important to know that the Orthodox canon law has no counterpart to the Latin concept of latae sententiae penalty, a penalty that is inflicted ipso facto, meaning automatically by force of the law itself at the very moment when a law is contravened, without the need for a synodal trial or judgment. In the Catholic canon law, an automatic excommunication penalty is prescribed for offenses such as apostasy, heresy, or schism. We should also clarify that the way today's anti-ecumenists from official orthodoxy employ the distinction between uncondemned and condemned heretics to justify their continued communion with Orthodox ecumenists is directly contrary to synodal and canonical tradition as applied by the Holy Fathers. In the context of their theory of opposing the heresy of ecumenism from within the Church, as they say, they assert that the Church canon law, by making a distinction between uncondemned and condemned heretics, does not allow us to break communion with those who preach heresy in the Church until a synod judges them. Otherwise, they claim we would be responsible for schism. However, even a cursory acquaintance with Church history demonstrates that each ecumenical synod was preceded by the struggle of Orthodox faithful who broke communion and separated themselves from heretics who were subsequently condemned by a synod. In other words, walling off from heretics precedes their synodal condemnation, not vice versa, as the opponents of ecumenism in official orthodoxy would like to believe. Regardless of the fact that this is the most fundamental principle applied throughout the centuries by all church fathers in their fight against various heresies, the erroneous opinion that one must remain in communion with uncondemned heretics until they are formally excised from the church by a synod has become firmly entrenched in the theological mindset of anti-ecumenists within official orthodoxy, thus significantly weakening their otherwise sincere witness to the truth of orthodoxy. The third principle, the nature of schism in the context of the primary elements of the local church. Every local church is one and undivided, comprised of both the clergy and the plenitude of the faithful. However, differences of opinion may arise within a local church, sometimes leading to a rupture of ecclesiastical communion, as was the case between the New Calendar majority and the Old Calendar minority. In such a situation, St. Chrysostomos poses the natural question: who among those who have broken off ecclesiastical communion with each other represents the one undivided local church of Greece, given that both groups derive from her the sanctifying grace and the ecclesiastical validity of their mysteries. However much it may seem, by virtue of its separate worship, its own houses of prayer and its own clergy, that the Old Calendarists constitute a distinct church different from the New Calendar Church, they nonetheless do not, Old Calendarists, cease to belong to the same one undivided Church of Greece, drawing their spiritual life and power from the organism of the Mother Church. Although the Old Calendarists do not constitute a second, different or separate church, they also do not fully coincide with the New Calendar innovators. Unlike the New Calendarists, they continue the history of the Church of Greece under its pure and uncorrupted Orthodox identity, as an unsullied and integral part of it. This remained the case until the difference between these two parts of the one local church, one maintaining orthodoxy and other deviating from it, is adjudicated by a pan-Orthodox synod. When this pan-Orthodox synod eventually condemns the innovating majority of the local church as thinking and acting contrary to orthodoxy and vindicates the minority that has remained steadfast in orthodoxy, it will depose and excise the former from the universal body of the Orthodox Church, while recognizing the latter, who preserve the faith and traditions unviolate, as the only canonical representatives of the one undivided local Orthodox Church. Keeping this in mind, St. Chrysostomos clarifies that his decision to assume leadership of the Old Calendar Church was not intended to found a different or second Orthodox Church in Greece. On the contrary, his goal was to heal the New Calendar schism and reunite the divided Church of Greece in the Orthodox faith and the celebration of the feasts. In this context, let us note that the idea that all calendarists constitute a separate church was first introduced by New Calendar Archbishop of Athens, Chrysostomos, who accused all calendarists of being schismatics and rebels, claiming that they had revolted against the state church without any ecclesiastical or canonical justification, and had thus founded their own separate church with no connection to the autocephalous Orthodox Church of Greece. Later, this concept was further developed in different contexts by Bishop Matthew and his followers. According to St. Chrysostomos, no one well versed in canon law can seriously claim that the old calendaries comprise a second church in Greece. On the contrary, he states, quote, "The church of genuine Orthodox Christians constitutes the traditional and non-innovating autocephalous Orthodox Church of Greece." Or, unquote. Or, as he writes elsewhere, she, the Old Calendar Church, represents the non-innovating fullness of the Church of Greece. According to St. Chrysostomos, there are not two Orthodox churches in Greece, but one, in which the form and the structure are represented by the majority of the new calendar hierarchy, while the spirit and essence of orthodoxy is represented by the minority of all calendars hierarchy and community. This is the case because through the calendar innovation, the official hierarchy ceased to represent the Orthodox nature of the Church of Greece. In doing so, the new calendar church separated itself from the body of the Orthodox Church, becoming a distinct church, different from the ancient church in terms of the latter's purity and non-innovating Orthodox spirit. The last principle, the role of the pan-Orthodox or ecumenical synod. In the simplistic and for that reason attractive ecclesiological theory of Bishop Matthew, there was no place and no need for the institution of a synod. In contrast, St. Chrysostomos argues that according to the fundamental principle of Orthodox teaching, it is the whole Church as the treasury of grace that establishes churches and endows them with divine mysteries and the grace of the Holy Spirit. Because of this, it is again the whole Church as a treasury of grace which, when assembled in an ecumenical or pan-Orthodox synod, after having exhausted all peaceful means of enlightening schismatics or heretics, ultimately excise them from the body of the Orthodox Church, transforming them from potential schismatic into actual schismatics or heretics. For this reason, Bishop Matthews was wrong claiming that this right belongs to correctly believing hierarchs who separated themselves from innovators. St. Chrysostomos writes that never in church history have any ancient or modern heretics been declared schismatics or deposed by hierarchs acting in isolation without a trial and a defense. Such declarations have always occurred through synods and canonically established ecclesiastical tribunals, before which the accused were summoned to defend themselves. The Church canon, specifically the 15th canon of the Second Synod, grants individual only the right to disavow the first hierarch when he departs from the tradition of the Church, and to break ecclesiastical communion with him even prior to a synodal verdict. However, it is the pan-Orthodox synod alone that holds the competency to condemn him and formally proclaim him heretic or schismatic. Very important is following to underscore. Speaking about the role of pan-Orthodox synod in the process of dealing with the new kind of schism, we should note that the hope for convening the synod of local Orthodox churches where the calendar issue would be faced on pan-Orthodox level was alive in the Old Calendar Church still during the first decade after St. Chrysostomos' repose. But then, and it's very important to understand it, due to intensive progress of ecumenism in official Orthodox churches, this hope that the local Orthodox churches would convene pan-Orthodox synod has completely vanished from the consciousness of our Church. Closing our short exposition of St. Chrysostomos' ecclesiological theses, we can summarize them as follows. The Orthodox Church of Greece became divided due to the calendar innovation. The new calendar church became liable to anathema by a pan-Orthodox synod for schism and heresy. The Olkande Church, having canonically separated from the innovators, continues the history of the autocephalous Orthodox Church of Greece in its non-innovating Orthodox nature. The goal of the sacred struggle and the mission of the Olkande Church was to heal the calendar schism and unite the Church of Greece in the Orthodox faith and traditions. Only a pan-Orthodox synod has the authority to condemn the innovators definitively as schismatics and to excise them from the body of the Church. Bishop Matthews and his supporters, ignoring some fundamental teaching of the Orthodox Church, incorrectly connected, that is also very important to underscore, that they incorrectly connected canonical walling off from the schismatics and heretics with the question of the presence of sanctifying grace in their mysteries. And in a completely arbitrary manner, they promoted it as a dogma and criterion of orthodoxy. This year, we celebrate the 70th anniversary of the repose in the Lord of St. Chrysostomos, the 90th anniversary of his assuming the spiritual and pastoral leadership of the Olkande Church as a confessor and a restorer of the traditions of the Holy Fathers, and the 155th anniversary of his birth. His many-sided contribution to our Church is immeasurable. His elaborate ecclesiological thinking leaves every researcher with a deep impression and admiration. Of critical importance is the fact that at the very beginning of a new epoch in the history of the Orthodox Church, marked by the heresy of ecumenism and the calendar reform, our Lord chose for his suffering, persecuted and confessing Church a hierarch who, like a new Moses, led his flock to the Holy Land of pure and non-innovating orthodoxy, following the admonition Moses addressed to all Israel, quote, "Ye shall not turn aside to the right hand or to the left, but go by the royal path," end quote. In this way, St. Chrysostomos protected his flock from attacks and dangers coming from both sides, from modernist reformers and from zealots of true orthodoxy who failed to build their witness on genuine patristic ecclesiology. Although the deadly virus of ecumenism has developed rapidly, radically changing the situation of the official churches beyond all recognition compared to the time of St. Chrysostomos, I believe that his basic ecclesiological principles and his example of submitting one's own thinking to the mind of the Church, as expressed by the synodal tradition and the teaching of the Holy Fathers, might provide us with safe guidelines so that we may continue bearing witness to the true Church of Christ even as we face what appears to be historically unprecedented culmination of apostasy in the official Orthodox churches, especially after they granted synodal endorsement to the calendar reform and to the heresy of ecumenism at the so-called Holy and Great Synod in Crete in 2016. May St. Chrysostomos intercede and pray for all of us. Thank you for your patience and for your attention.
Thank you so much, Father, for your presentation. I'd like to also thank His Eminence Metropolitan Ambrose for joining us this morning. I guess this evening in Greece. Your Eminence, your blessings and prayers. Likewise, it's wonderful to see many familiar faces, and we have Mother Ambrosia, and it looks like the entire sisterhood from the Holy Protection Convent in Bluffton, Alberta. And Bishop Seraphim, though I don't see him, but anyways, we ask for all of your prayers not just the hierarchs and monastics, but from the entire church and from all the laity, as Father Jiří expressed, that it's through the prayers and the repentance of the whole church that God in his mercy will provide true shepherds to guide us. So we have a lot of questions that have come in. We also have a schedule to uphold. So at 11 o'clock, in 6 minutes, the people that are interested in going to the convent tour need to make their way. So what I would like to propose is that we will adjourn right now and allow for those that have to make their way to the convent for the convent tour an opportunity to exit the auditorium. We have the Q&A panel with our Zoom audience starting in 5 minutes. So for those that need a break here, for the panelists, this will give you an opportunity to stay. Father Jiří, I would like for you to stay so people can ask, on Zoom can ask their questions. If you're going to the convent and you have a question particularly in regards to Father's talk, we will have an opportunity to address those at 7:30 this evening. Okay, so again, if you're going to the convent, please make your way, grab a cup of coffee and start going to your cars. If you're joining us on Zoom, thank you for your patience. We'll take a five-minute break to allow everybody to have a cup of water, get some more coffee, and then we'll have the Q&A session, panel questions, and of course Father Jiří will be here to answer specific questions in regards to his lecture. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you for your patience. It took a little bit longer than expected because there was a long line in front of the coffee because it's San Ignacio coffee. As you can imagine, everybody was very excited. But you can get your cup of coffee. There's a blessing in every cup at www.sanignacio.com. They're the unofficial sponsors of this seminary conference. So I would encourage you to support Bishop Maximus and his brotherhood, and in reality support our entire church, primarily our missions in South America, Central America, and in Africa. So before we proceed with the Q&A, and I understand some of the panelists themselves have a question to Father Jiří, so we'll give an opportunity for the panelists to ask their own questions. I did want to bring everybody's attention to the book that Father Forzi mentioned yesterday, FAQs about the GOC. This was authored by Dr. Dimitrios Alibertis, who is one of our most beloved faculty members here at the seminary, and published by our very own Center for Traditionalist Orthodox Studies. You can get a copy of this book from Eastern Christian Supply, which is run by the nuns here in Etna. They also have a website, so we'll make sure to put a link in the description. That being said, Your Eminences, please, I understand both of you had a question or...
Go ahead. Can I go ahead?
No, go ahead, please.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Father Jiří very, very much for absolutely edifying, instructional, beautifully prepared presentation, which, however, I must note, because of the depth of the subject matter, demanded a lot of your audience. And so maybe I'm asking you to repeat something in the talk that you handled in one or two sentences that I didn't perhaps perfectly gather. But I think you will understand my question very well, which is that evidently St. Chrysostomos in his own lifetime and in his own struggles argued for the even actively for the presence of sanctifying grace, or grace in the mysteries of the new calendris, as he saw it. That was that we must speak of the ultimate judgment, the consequences of the ultimate judgment, only in terms of potential, that they awaited the Pan-Orthodox Synod to be put in place, and then the deprivation of grace from those mysteries, as Bishop Matthew of Rysthenis wanted to see active and real in his own lifetime. In fact, from the time of the calendar reform, that for him it was it needed to be affirmed. Nevertheless, as we all know, in our own basic ecclesiological document, the Church of the True Orthodox Christians and the heresy of ecumenism, we, paraphrasing that just simply, we deny, to state this properly, we affirm rather that we cannot guarantee, affirm the mysteries, the validity of the mysteries of the new calendris. It's a double negative there. But so how do we account for that change or that development in thinking from the time of our blessed founder, our saintly founder, and his inspiration and his clear gift of the charisma of understanding the primacy of truth? How do we understand the development of that teaching, or however you want to characterize it, the change, in terms of our modern pronouncements and synodal thinking?
Well, starting my response, maybe I would say that I wouldn't entirely agree with your phrase in the beginning that St. Chrysostomos actively, how do you phrase it, argue for, or...
Yeah, I think I did say that. It seemed that he that he maintained that we must affirm the validity of the mysteries of the new calendarist. And perhaps that's an incorrect appraisal of his thinking.
Starting what is clear, it is clear that St. Chrysostomos understood that it was arbitrary connection, or so from his point of view, we can speak about the innovation introduced to the history of Orthodox Church by Bishop Matthew and his followers. That for the first time in the history of the Church, we see that anti-heretical opposition, or that Orthodox opposing a particular heresy, that they connected together not just the right, the need, the necessity for breaking of ecclesiastical communion with the heretics, with the question of the presence or the absence of divine mysteries.
Yeah.
So it is for the, and we have to understand it, that it happened for the first time in the 2000 years history of the Orthodox Church, when this connection was firmly established. Not only that it was firmly established, but it was even promoted as a criterion of orthodoxy. There are many assertions of Saint Chrysostomos.
So in other words, that if you do not agree with that, if you do not yourself affirm that, your own orthodoxy is in question. So in other words, St. Chrysostomos himself, who clearly was opposed to the innovations and fought them, the fact that he would not affirm that made his own orthodoxy.
Yeah. So it means that it was by mistake of Bishop Matthew, this context was established within the history of the Orthodox Church. St. Chrysostomos was firstly opposed to this connection. He understood that it's real innovation done. So I think so without this precedent, or without this this innovation introduced by Bishop Matthew, St. Chrysostomos would have no interest in affirming the presence of the sanctifying grace of the mysteries of the New Calendar Church. Just opposite true, that there are more several clear statements even during the first period before the controversy with Bishop Matthew started, where St. Chrysostomos asserted the absence of sanctifying grace in the mysteries of those who promoted the calendar innovation. And only, so I think that all those later statements might be seen as a reaction to the challenge presented by Matthewites.
I understand. And isn't there also a kind of a corollary point that presence or absence of grace in mysteries itself does not necessarily mean that they are partaken of to one's benefit or to one's salvation?
So we can. I have here the quote in order to illustrate in the broader context in which Bishop Matthew and his followers introduced this arbitrary connection between walling off from heretics and the question of the presence in their mysteries. So Father Eugenius Dombros, who was one of the fierce supporter of Bishop Matthew, he wrote, "If they, quote, if the new calendars have grace, upon what canon will we rely in order to reject this church? And why should we reject it, since it has grace and we can be saved there too? In that case, why should we undergo persecution, harassment, toil, imprisonment, exile, and hardship, all to no purpose?" Mm-hmm. So in this way, they arbitrarily made their ceasing communion with new calendarists dependent on the absence of the grace in their mysteries. So this, and of course, as we understand, it has also this dimension that they assume that once they are mysteries, they are automatically for salvation. They reject an idea that there might be mysteries served and received into someone's condemnation. And we can trace that there is a very strange causal bond between Bishop Matthew and the anti-ecumenists within the world orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. Probably without understanding that they are just following in the footsteps of Bishop Matthew, they argue in the precisely same manner. Let me quote from probably the famous of them, Father Epiphanius Theodoropoulos. If the new calendarists have valid mysteries, if the Church of Grace has grace, then they are truly Orthodox Church, a Church of Christ, and everyone who departs therefrom becomes a schismatic. So now we have the very strange meeting of two extremes, and based on the same arbitrary connection between warning from heretics and the question of the present mysteries. So I think that then in this context created by Bishop Matthew, Saint Chrysostom has no other way than in some way to reject his ecclesiology, which necessarily led him to say that there are mysteries. But it wasn't what he wanted to say, because he made it very clear in his treatises that we ceased ecclesiastical communion with new calendars not because we believe that there is no grace, but it's our duty to retain orthodoxy, and we cannot do it otherwise we separate themselves from them. So then, in this context created by this innovative ecclesiology of Bishop Matthew, there was no good exit.
Yeah,
I would say.
Thank you.
Your Eminence, do you have any questions for?
I really appreciate your talk. There's a lot of very illuminating things. I'm very glad you brought out how our church is like the body of Christ, the spiritual and physical, and it's important for us to understand all that. I've always thought, I don't mean to intrude my ideas, but that the burden of whether or not there's grace or not isn't on us. The burden is on them, and so logically you think after all these years with all these heretics, with all these things going on, I don't see how you can say, one can't make a good argument that they have grace, and so it's the burden is on them. But I appreciate very much that distinction that you made about how this is the first time in 2,000 years when they connected those two things. That I never really processed, to be honest with you.
And this really crippled.
It did.
The whole witness of the whole of the church.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and it is.
I don't want to say things conspiratorial, but I really think that there are elements of the state church that encourage that. And when our bishops were hiding in basements, Matthew could go freely about.
And thank you for reminding me. We should stress, and it was part of my talk, but then since it became very, very heavy, I took it out. But we have to mention that the whole idea of the absence of sanctifying grace in mysteries of schismatics or heretics, that it was first thrown into the discussion in the context of issued by Chrysostomos Papadopoulos of Athens. In his encyclical, let me quote from his encyclical dated 1926, so after he introduced new calendar. So he issued an encyclical in which he proclaimed that, and it's a paraphrase, synodal decisions are absolutely binding, and for that reason, those who disobey them no longer belong to the church and are stripped of the channels of divine grace and are cut off from the church, becoming liable to eternal damnation.
So a nice illustration of the primacy of authority.
Yeah. And so he was the first who accused old calendarists of being stripped of the divine grace. And then we can trace how this idea was cultivated among some zealots on the Mount Athos. And then in 1934, I think it was 34, before the three hierarchs joined the Old Calendar movement, they declared their own encyclical, like a reaction to this encyclical, where they proclaimed the state church to be schismatics and stripped of the divine grace. And after that, so before St. Chrysostomos and two other hierarchs joined the Old Calendar movement, it had been spread mainly among Athonites, zealots. And we can also say that in their eyes, it had already become the criterion of orthodoxy. So they forced the hierarchs, you have to sign it, otherwise you cannot obtain our trust.
So this was likely the source of Bishop Matthew's own thinking, because he was an Athonite and didn't come out of the vacuum.
Well, thank you, Father. I'd like to first take a moment and introduce the rest of the panel, and then we have a lot of questions that have been coming in. Some of them are questions that were submitted earlier when people registered. Some of them specifically to this talk, and other questions from yesterday's talk that weren't necessarily in line with the theme of yesterday's talk. So I'm going to try to, when I read the question, point to the person that has been asked to answer it. So on the right of Metropolitan Moses, we have Subdeacon Jason Finney, who is a master's student at the seminary, as well as serving as the student advisor. Additionally, and of quite importance to our church here in North America, Jason is also the director of St. Senia's Camp, which is our annual children's camp in the Northeast, typically in Maine. It's been for how many years now, Jason?
21, I believe.
21.
In Maine.
And the bond between the seminary and St. Senia's Camp continues to grow, mostly because a lot of the former campers and counselors and administrators of the camp have become students or also serve the seminary. So, and Jason is the latest, and we're very grateful for his help as a student advisor, for his participation in classes. I am in a class with Jason, and Jason will be able to share his perspective as a student entering seminary, sort of in a different phase of life than perhaps some of our younger students. And then next to Jason, we have Vasilios Athanasiou, who is a graduate of the seminary in its undergraduate program and is currently working to complete his master's of theological studies at the seminary. Vasilios will be speaking from a perspective of someone that completed the undergraduate program, someone that came in straight from high school, and will be able to share his insights on that, as well as speak on behalf of his wonderful wife Theodora, who is also a student or a graduate, and they actually came as single bachelor students, and now he can also speak on behalf of the married student perspective. So, and then I will do my best to attempt to answer questions on behalf of sort of the administrators. On the non-theological, anything theological, I will immediately punt to their eminences, but I'll try to do my best to answer questions. And then we do have Gabrielle, who serves as the registrar and is sort of the hostess for the virtual conference. She can speak in regards to enrollment questions. So the first question, just to really kick it off, Your Eminence, Bishop Auxentius, are there plans for satellite campus or sister institutions to the seminary in Greece?
There certainly is such an ambition. Plans would, if I said yes to plans, that would mean that we had, formally engaged in developing plans, because it will entail a great deal of thinking, preparation, and work, collecting of resources, and so on. God grant that it actually may occur. Metropolitan Photios, on behalf of the Synod, has expressed this desire to me many times, and it certainly makes good sense. For those who don't know, it still is extremely difficult, in fact impossible, at least up until the present time, for an ecclesiastical body that is not part of the State Church of Greece to sponsor an academic institution. So the only way around that impediment, and we view it as a kind of persecution, frankly, of our church, a continuing persecution, the only way around that is to work with an international agency that would sponsor such an institution. So that's the case for our developing that. We need quite a number of resources for that. Not only additional talent, we need economic resources for it, and so on. God willing, something of the sort may actually happen in the future if things don't actually change within Greece and make it possible for them spontaneously to develop something of their own. But that, again, as I understand, still necessitates a change of law, policies there that prevent it. So it is certainly a shared ideal, a shared wish that we and our church hierarchy would like to see come to fruition. We ask prayers for mothers that it do so. One of our own, just to illustrate the problems involved from our own standpoint, we have to go through a massive petition and preparation process with our own accrediting agency. You can't just do that and ignore the accrediting agency. If it is actually to be a satellite campus and to share in your degree programs, then it has to be reviewed, qualified, and approved, just in the same way that we are. So we would have to anticipate all of those duties in launching such a program. We have actually discussed it, though, and so God grant that it come to fruition. I won't give a date.
Thank you, Your Eminence. This is a question for Vasilios. Do you live monastically? Are you under disciplines? What do you do when you are not studying or have classes?
I don't know what to say for the first part of the question. Do I live monastically? I live with my wife and 2 children. Live with my wife and 2 children. But what I do outside of my schoolwork, I take evening courses now that I'm in the master's program. So during the daytime, I work at the local high school here in Etna. And that's a 7-hour workday. I work as a special education paraprofessional. And then during my off hours, which are few, I try to go to the gym that the seminary provides. just congregate for a fellowship with some of the seminarians and try to go shopping trips on the weekends. It's pretty mundane. But yes, thank you.
And another question for you to answer on behalf of Theodora.
I need milk.
Seminaries are often thought of as ways to train future priests. While this is an important function of a seminary, it is not the only one, to my understanding. To the female students at Spots, what was your goal in attending the seminary, and what do you feel the impact has been on your life and plans after graduation?
So let's have to channel her.
Yes.
Well, the first thing that I'm thinking about is something from St. Nectarios. He writes about the necessity of women having a theological education because they're mothers, first and foremost. And I see that every day with how my wife handles my children perfectly. And I'm very, very grateful for her theological education because of that. She's an iconographer too, and she's always working on icons in between feeding the babies or preparing meals. And so I think her theological education is indispensable for her being a wife and mother, and in any capacity she might serve the church one day.
Thank you. Your Eminence, I'm going to direct this one to you, and then you can redirect it. How does one learn Hezekiah and Nepsis to understand God's revelation with compunction? And how does the love of God energetically work through the ordering of time within the Orthodox ecclesiastical calendar?
That's an hour answer. We can talk. What can I say? I mean, where to begin? I always like quoting the real simple thing. St. John Cashin in his conference with Abba Moses. I'll just say as briefly as possible. Abba Moses asked him, "What's our goal? To be saved, to find paradise." And then, the answer actually that St. John Cashin gave was to be saved and find paradise. And then said, okay, that's the ultimate goal, but what's the immediate goal? And so then St. John Cashin said, well, we don't know, explain to us. And so St. Moses said that our immediate goal is purity of heart. And so both the lay people and the monastics, all through the cycle of services, through our discipline in the church, through accepting our discipline of fasting, and then feasting and whatever else, the church has everything for us. And so if we submit and try to conform our hearts and minds to God, to His commandments, and to the cycle of the services, then there is spiritual perception comes from that, because one's heart becomes purified. St. Paul says that a carnal man can't receive the things of God, and so our church sets everything up, both for laity and for monastics, for everyone, to purify our hearts and to come to spiritual perception and knowledge of God. And so I just love how Father Jiří was saying about how the church is spiritual and physical. We have the mysteries and we have the administration, and I think we always have to remember that when we talk about the church or family life and everything, in a certain sense, it's the categories of normal human life, but also the categories outside of what would be human life without participation in the things of God. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
That's better than I could have done, Your Eminence. Thank you. That's a beautiful answer.
Okay, I thank you, Your Eminence. I have a question directed to Jason. How do the teachers help the students gain the mind of the fathers in true theology of God, instead of only conceptions and rational ideas?
Well, one, I think that it's important to note that the format of the classes, at least those that I've been privileged to take part of, though is presented in a lecture format for part of the class at the very least, there's a great deal of discussion in the classes. And I think the students are hard at work in trying to apply the concepts that they're learning across classes, which is fundamentally important. Integrating aspects of their own experience and asking questions, not necessarily on the personal level per se, but trying to integrate their understanding of how all of this fits into living a life in the faith. And the faculty are very welcoming of those kinds of questions. Though occasionally they need to be paused for a later time. That will come to in a future course or later on in the given course. I hope that answers the question.
Would anybody else on the panel like to add to Jason's? Father Jiří, you are one of the main teachers.
What I would stress, what is probably the most valuable asset of our seminary, is that it isn't just theological faculty, as it is usually the case of Orthodox faculties throughout the world. That we, by its physical location, our seminary is located in a very hesychastic environment. It is surrounded by two monastery and a convent. A lot of teachers comes from both, from the monasteries. We have also teachers who are priests as well. So in this way, we try to avoid this tragical division, separation that happened in the Eastern Orthodox Church as the result of Western influences, where the dogmatic or the teaching of the Church was separated from its original context, which is the liturgical life of the Church. So we always try to guide our students in their deepening, in understanding that theology is just the opposite side of the liturgical life, and to keep it together, and to put a lot of emphasis on theology as a result of spiritual experience, not so much as the intellectual activity as it is usually presented.
We have a question. People across the Orthodox world are seeking formal Orthodox Christian theological education from a traditionalist institution. Currently, no such option exists. This presents a gap that the genuine Orthodox Church of Greece could fill, providing a much-needed resource and drawing more people to the true Orthodox Church. Does the seminary have any plans to address this critical academic need?
Actually, Gabrielle would be very competent to answer that, but I don't see her, and I'm not sure that we have good sound from her.
She's on.
Yeah, we had problems with sound. I mean, Gabrielle, do you want to take this, or do you want me to take it? Maybe it's better she just comes in. Yeah.
I'm going to cede my spot. I have a blessing of having my wife actually hear Vasilios. I don't have to speak on her behalf.
Okay. Forgive me, I can't speak through the speakers to you, so I just decided to come in here. Can you repeat the question?
Yes. People across the Orthodox world are seeking formal Orthodox Christian theological education from a traditionalist institution. Currently, no such option exists. This presents a gap that the genuine Orthodox Church of Greece could fill, providing a much-needed resource in drawing more people to the true Orthodox Church. Does the seminary have any plans to address this critical academic need?
I think that there will be a need for expansion of my answer, but first I would just like to point out that we do offer education, of course, for people who are able to come here, but also online for people internationally. So in terms of, unfortunately, our licensure restricts us from offering online education to individuals within the United States within our programs. But outside of the United States, we do have students enrolling online. So there is a limit to how much they can enroll in online, but that does open the door. And in fact, the entire first year of the bachelor's program is available online. So for anybody who has the desire to build a foundation, sort of undergo the shift of worldview that happens in the first year, I think people can attest to, that is a real option for a lot of the Orthodox world. Also to be considered is the delicate issue of education without formation, which I bring up almost every time because many of our questions are about online education. And as I said, we do offer some, but it's limited, both by our licensing and accrediting agencies, and then it's also limited by our own imposition because we understand the detriment that an education without pairing with formation could cause for a person. So, Your Eminence, that might be something you want to add to, but I think also just in general, we post a lot on the internet, on YouTube as much as we can. Our resources are limited, and our time is limited. So the more people get involved and the more people come here and sacrifice their time and even come for visiting lectures, it broadens our ability to serve people outside of the seminary student body. But I'm sure you have things to add.
I'm tempted to, I'll say a word, then maybe if you want, you can speak. Father Jiří is on the curriculum committee. I am not. I know this is a hot topic, a perennial topic for the curriculum committee, what to do about this strong interest. This question is not alone. As Gabrielle rightly points out, we get it repeatedly, and not just from Greece, internationally. And therefore, because it's a need of our church, it's an expressed desire, wish of our church and of our faithful, and a very logical one as well. We certainly take it seriously. At the same time, as Gabrielle rightly pointed out, we have besides the difficult challenge of licensure and or accreditation approval for the sake of launching a strictly entirely online program, which is basically what they're asking for. Remote education from beginning to end, full 4 years or whatever for a bachelor's or a master's degree. To undertake that, not only do we have our let's say administrative difficulties that we have to deal with, we also have the problem of formation. That we do not believe that theological knowledge can be imparted or can be cultivated in a vacuum, as it were, or through the ethers. It must be done in context. You must be with a worshiping community. You must have a spiritual father. You must interact with your fellow students. You must have accountable professors, clergy that oversee your development. Make sure that you're using the knowledge you're being given responsibly, and that it's taking that it's falling into good earth and maturing properly. That's very hard to do in a vacuum, and that's a topic. That's what I hear constantly from the curriculum committee: the pros and cons. Great need, for example, Africa. It's next to impossible to get a visa from Africa to come here. We already know that. So what can we do? On the one hand. On the other hand, we have seen firsthand instances in which, we know it in the history of our church that people in which that knowledge entails responsibility, and those responsible must make sure that responsibility is covered, that the people are properly imbibing it, and it's taking the desired effect in their soul. We're just having to balance these two, and we're certainly not going to abandon this as it were, this duty on the one hand, but we're not going to launch into it irresponsibly either. I guess that's, so maybe you want to add to that, Father.
Thank you.
Can I offer a follow-up question that is connected to this? One that came through and one that I've received many times by phone call and by email are not necessarily questions about coming to the school, but they are about coming to the church. So a lot of people call or contact the seminary because they are inquiring about Orthodoxy, or they've become a catechumen in the World Orthodox Church and are starting to understand that they might be inclined to investigate more. And in some cases, they're asking, can I come to the seminary to learn? And we do ask people to first connect with a parish. That's been the sort of trend, is to try to find a spiritual father, try to get some grounding, because obviously launching straight into a theological education can be extremely overwhelming for somebody just entering into the Christian life, for example. But for those people who are watching these lectures and listening to these talks, what kind of direction can you give to them as first steps to take if they were inspired by what they've learned?
And this is and what is their status? This is as catechumens or inquirer, or not even Orthodox?
Yeah. Where should someone begin?
You want to address that? No?
Well, I can give them a book. The Way to the Kingdom of God by St. Innocent. I mean, I don't know what to say, because read St. Cyril Jerusalem's catechetical lectures.
Well, certainly we can
find a spiritual father, like that's what he said,
The ways in which people approach the Orthodox Church are evolving, and we've discussed this much in our pastoral theology classes. The fact that traditional modes of introduction of others of heterodox to the Orthodox Church have really evolved in modern times. It used to be mainly that through the missionary work of our communities, in which their presence here in the West, for example, would provoke natural curiosity, interest. People would talk to individuals in the workplace. Maybe somebody would marry a heterodox, and they'd have to be introduced to the Orthodox Church for the sake of the marriage, and become Orthodox, or social interactions and so on. But very slow and organic, as it were, and face-to-face as a general rule, personal contact. That has been flipped on its head. That is no longer the majority method, as it were, for people learning about and coming to Orthodoxy. The majority, I think, of our converts now that we see that we are interacting with in the seminary have done this online. Mm-hmm. They just through the connections, whatever they're looking at, YouTube videos, hosts to self-improvement programs, word of mouth, or an email, and say, hey, look at this link, or read this lecture, or hear this lecture, and so on. And in turn, they are actually educating themselves with respect to Orthodoxy, again, online. They're doing their own research, Wikipedia, again, just links and websites and so on. And sometimes they come to us and they have never met very interested in Orthodoxy, and they have never met an Orthodox in the flesh.
Yeah.
It's a real phenomenon. Okay, so it is what it is, and we as pastors have to recognize that, and as it were, adapt to the changing landscape and cultivate, opportunities for people to meet Orthodox who have been formed properly and are trying with good intent and in a good context to fulfill their duty as Orthodox. So that's why we have the St. Pochos Conference. Actually, that we say, okay, come and join us if you are interested and would like to see not only what an Orthodox education may entail, but also what an Orthodox community aspires to be, how we try to live it. And or, of course, we refer them to our local churches, wherever they may be, but they are far and few between, as most people know.
Yeah.
So for some people, that's hundreds and hundreds of miles to travel, and that's difficult. And it may be just a mission parish, which is only meeting every other week, or only has a priest who is actually able to visit once every month, or whatever.
Yeah.
These are all issues we're trying to address with our school. That's why we founded it. That's why we. That's part of our primary goal is to address that shortage, that need among the faithful, for people to go out. The fields are ripe for harvest now with a new kind of harvest. Internet Orthodox. It's a legitimate. You can bemoan the fact that it's all cerebral, it's all virtual. But it is what it is, and we have to address it. Now, I don't think, as you just heard, that doesn't mean that we just become Orthodox of the same kind, and that all of our activity, all of our fellowship, our communion with one another is, as it were, virtual. No, we still absolutely need this real, genuine, what's the opposite of virtual? Real, I guess, embodiment of the church.
Yeah.
And so these people have to ideally be slowly introduced to that, given every opportunity as best we can help and provide to meet Orthodox in the flesh, to interact with them, and in truth, start to disengage a little bit from virtual reality. In other words, repairing some of the damage done, which is absolutely undeniable by our phones, our computers, our virtual life. It is what it is. We have to cope with it and deal with it, but I do not think it's right for us to say that, oh yes, this is a good thing. This is healthy progress, as it were, of our society and so on. There are many, many downsides to the virtual life that our society is experiencing. The loss of interpersonal skills, the being subject to horrible passions and problems, depression, for example, the loss of meaning and fulfillment in life because you can't live in an iPhone, truthfully.
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry, it's a long-winded answer to a complicated problem, but we do talk about it a lot, and we do give thought to it, and thus, we have a YouTube channel, as everybody, we're demonstrating at this moment.
Yeah.
We have to use it as a new platform, as it were, to try to engage the public, but we certainly have to regularly affirm that Orthodox life is not on the internet. It's in reality. And reality is here with your brother and your sister, your local community, the Church of Christ, locally embodied. And if you don't have one where you live, well, become a part of the solution. Okay? Get yourself educated, make yourself Orthodox, and truly Orthodox, and become a force for good, and again, become a part of the solution, not a part of the problem. That's our common duty.
Thank you.
You look like you can add to that something for
Well, why don't I take this opportunity to return to the virtual world? Thank you.
Thank you for your brief interlude as a real panelist. Thank you, Gabrielle. Well, I could say a lot on the topic of becoming part of the solution, but I'm going to return to the questions from our panelists, or from our audience. So, are the writings of St. Chrysostomos, to which Father Jiří refers to, available in English?
Your name is literally in the question, Father. You can't avoid that one.
Although Father Patapios would be. The short answer is not. They are not available, unfortunately. And Father Patapios is the only, I would say, as far as I know, together with the ever-member Metropolitan Chrysostomos, they together translated how many? 3 texts?
3 texts by St. Chrysostomos, yes.
And as far as I know, these are the only texts available in English.
I think that's right, at this point, yes.
At this point.
Can we speak about our aspirations? Yes.
We aspire to translate the entire corpus of St. Chrysostomos' works over a period of years, and we hope to begin this sometime this year. It's a lot of material to cover, but there's a desperate need to present his works in good, reliable English translations. So we have the 3 that we mentioned, that Father referred to in his talk, are available in a book called Resistance or Exclusion, which is published by the Center for Traditionalist Orthodox Studies back in 2000, I think. And also in that same volume is, for the sake of comparison, a text by Bishop Matthew Bresteni, to which St. Chrysostomos responded. And it gives you a very good idea of the differences between their approaches to issues of ecclesiology. It's well worth reading, but it's just the beginning. There's an awful lot more. There are 2 fairly thick volumes of St. Chrysostomos' writings, and they're not even complete, because he wrote a lot of letters. There's much correspondence which has to be collected together and sorted out and probably edited. And even the works included in the 2-volume edition, which itself has many flaws, need to be carefully checked against the original publications. So there's a lot of work to be done just in getting the reliable textual basis for such a project. But we do absolutely intend to do this, because it's been a long-standing desire of mine, and I can certainly say from for His Eminence Metropolitan Chrysostomos of blessed memory, he certainly wanted to translate more of his works, but just too many other projects to be worked on, to be completed. But now I think we have a way forward, sometime, God willing, later on in this term, certainly during the summer, to begin this project in earnest, and the work to which Father Jiří referred, the church or the ecclesiastical calendar as a criterion of orthodoxy, that is one of the most important, and that's an absolutely essential text. So, only parts of it have appeared in translation or excerpts in various articles in Orthodox tradition over the years, for example. But some of them are available on the Metropolis to Fili's website too. There's a section you can look at there. It's a very, very important project. I'm glad someone asked that question.
I just for a point of reference for the audience, could you share a rough estimate of how many pages of writings exist that need to be translated?
It's probably about 2,000 pages, and maybe that's not including the correspondence, which may be a good deal more. I simply don't know how much he wrote. There's another volume which contains some of the correspondence, but I haven't had a chance to look at that and study the way in which it's presented. And I'm sure that there must be much of his correspondence in archival form, in the archives of our church. I simply don't know what's available, but that would be in Greece, and that would be required time spent in Greece to come through all that material. The letters will give a great insight into his thinking and interaction with church from within his own community and those outside of it. I suspect there'll be a lot of material that will be very important, but at least we have the actual printed writings in some form. We can start work on those.
Yeah.
So we have to admit that there is a huge debt on the other side, not only among English-speaking members of our church, but even on the side of the Greek-speaking members of our church, because in order to start a project of translation into English, you need first of all the critical edition of the text of St. Chrysostomos, and unfortunately, of course, there has been historical reason why we were unable to do that, but we have to admit that we owe it to our common spiritual father because of this lack, we aren't able to pay a due honor and due debt to our spiritual father. So
it's not just his writings on ecclesiology, though those are the most important, but he also wrote a doctoral thesis, or seminary thesis, Halki, on the controversial figure of Patriarch Cyril Lucaris, whose orthodoxy he defended, but with very careful scholarship, and that's an important work in itself. And he addressed also more general issues of Hellenic culture or Christianity, and in relation to Hellenic culture. He didn't have as much time to write on those issues because most of his labors were expended on shepherding the old calendar church and all the difficulties he experienced in that process. So had it not been for that particular issue, he might have spent more time just writing on theological issues. And maybe this material that is not published, I still don't know, but we want to present a more rounded picture of him, and he's not just physiology, but had theological issues too. And he's a brilliant, gifted man, and his Greek is very, very lofty, but style is also difficult, I think. Wouldn't you say, for all the issues for modern Greeks to understand? It probably had to be translated into demonic Greek. Like as is happening with St. Nectarius of Pontopolis, they're translating his works into modern Greek because contemporary Greeks have a difficulty understanding his style, which is very much the same as that of St. Chrysostomos, the same kind of milieu they came from. You have to know classical Greek very well to translate St. Chrysostomos, and that itself is a major issue. But as Father says, getting a proper critical edition is a high priority. We want to start at least with something, but we want to move on. As the case of the Church Fathers, you oftentimes have only the texts that are in Minus Patrologia Graeca. At least you can work on that, but you hopefully want to establish or at least discover a critical text that would give a more reliable basis on which to present a translation. So it's the same kind of process. You do what you can, what you have, but you aspire to find something better, and that's part of the process of translating is also getting the Greek text in order and writing annotations and commentaries on them, explaining the references and the allusions, many of which are lost on contemporary Orthodox if they don't know the historical context that he was addressing. So it's important to present that too.
Thank you. Thank you, Father.
You're welcome.
We have one last question that came in, and then we're gonna have to adjourn for lunch, which starts at 12:30, and then after lunch we have the second scheduled presentation. So in order to maintain the conference schedule, I think we'll take one more question and then we're going to adjourn. There were a lot of questions, Father, that have been coming in that have not been addressed about specifically your past presentation. I will direct them all your way. Clearly, as more and more materials are translated, maybe one day the seminary could have a conference solely dedicated to St. Chrysostomos. Just from the amount of questions that have been coming in, we could talk for hours. But back to the panel and questions that are being submitted from our virtual audience. I saw that a seminary course, New Testament, is taught by a nun. How does that relate to the scriptures and traditions of women not teaching the men of the church? Your Eminence, why don't you...
I'm going to Father. Yeah. Can you do that?
Well, there wasn't my choice, but she's not teaching in church. She's teaching in a school.
Yeah.
So that admonition was probably the gathering of the Christians and the liturgy. And the whole idea, like the way we set up the temple, we have the holy table and then the gospel on the holy table. So the priesthood offers the sacrifice and then gives the teaching in the context of worship and the teachings of the church. But this is a school, it's different.
And we should also know that in our church, we don't have just fathers of the church, we have also mothers of the church.
Next question.
I think both responses.
Short and sweet.
Okay, well,
I'd actually, you're going to call to a close with that?
Yeah.
You want to? We've got another hierarchy here. Bishop Ambrose, Your Eminence, forgive me, I heard you speaking earlier, and for problems that we don't understand right now, here in the auditorium, your voice is coming through in a choppy way. But Gabrielle did assure us that for the participants, that it's coming through clearly. So if you would like to add a word or make any comments, we may not be nodding enthusiastically for we're not being able to follow you, but it'll be captured, we trust, and we can listen to it later. And then if you, certainly it would be a benefit to our remote participants. Anything you want to say, either with respect to previous questions or something you want to add that you think is necessary, please do us that kindness.
I can hear you. Hear me.
Yeah, again, as I expressed, it's very choppy. We only hear portions, fragments of each syllable. So please just go ahead and speak. The audience, as we understand, can hear you.
Some action but because use period.
Because we realized a small improvisation that helped us to actually hear what you were saying. But I trust it was captured, and we will all review it once we get the opportunity. Thank you very much for being with us, and we hope we get to see you again in the afternoon when we reconvene. And with that, we're going to come to...
So with that, I would like to take a moment to thank Your Eminence Metropolitan Moses, Your Eminence Metropolitan Ambrose, Bishop Oxentius, Father Jiří, Jason Basilios, Gabrielle, for taking the time to sit on this panel. I'd like to thank once again all of you who are joining us from all around the world. I see many familiar faces: Canada, England, France, Sweden, it looks like, maybe Australia, maybe I know people registered from Australia, and Greece. So thank you all for your participation. I would add that this is only possible, and great thanks is due to all the benefactors of the seminary that have, first of all, the founders that established the seminary, and all of you who, through your prayerful support, have continued to its flourishing. As has clearly been laid out by Father Forzi yesterday, by Father Jiří today, by our hierarchs, there is a great need in the church. The seminary is an institution that is trying to be part of the solution. It's one of many institutions. On a practical level, your own parish is the primary institution, and your own parish priest is through whom you are able to participate in the church, and your support of your parish is very important. Your support of the monasteries where monastics are able to dedicate themselves in prayer and in work of translating and writing is very important. Your support of other institutions, such as our camps, both here in America, we have a camp in England, the missionary efforts of local diocese, supporting your local diocese, and the missionary efforts of that we have both here in North America. Metropolitan Ambrose has thousands, countless of thousands of Orthodox faithful now throughout Africa. That is only possible through the ongoing support of the greater church. So thank you again for all of your support of the seminary, and thank you for all your prayerful support in general. So we will reconvene for the next lecture, and right now we'll break for lunch.
And what time do we reconvene again?
Oh, I was hoping you wouldn't ask, because I don't remember off the top of my head.
2 p.m., Alexei. 2 p.m. 2 p.m.
Okay, we're reconvening at 2 p.m. Pacific standard time. Yes. Thank you.
For the prayers of Holy Fathers, Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy and save us.
The prayers of Master, Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy and save us.